June 4, 1944. Somewhere outside Harland, Iowa. Dawn was unfolding over the corn, its pale light stretching across grass beaded with dew. The damp soil's earthy smell mixed with a sweeter note. The warm, cloying aroma of honey drifting from neatly aligned beehives beside the barn. John Carson, 36, rested a hand on the coarse wooden edge of a hive box, his flannel plastered to his back by the morning humidity. Bees moved around him in steady, purposeful motion, slipping in and out of their wax-lined homes as if following orders. For a moment he looked less like a common farmer and more like a subdued commander overseeing a winged battalion. He scooped a spoon into a jar. The honey was thick, amber and shining, and he let it fall back in a slow, glimmering ribbon. His voice, roughened from years of tobacco and harsh Iowa winters, cut the quiet. "Sweetest thing in the world," he muttered. "But there ain't nothing sweet about this war." A distant rumble grew louder. Not tractors or trucks, but airplanes. American B-17 bombers on a training run skimmed the farmland, bound for England, for the continent, for hell. John shaded his eyes and watched without waving. There was no one to wave at anymore. His brother Mark had shipped out the previous winter. Letters had dried up. The war felt like a separate realm that had taken every able-bodied man and left men like John behind. Surrounded by bees, sweat, and silence, he reached for another jar when a low rumble interrupted the insect hum. A military truck rolled up the gravel drive, painted olive drab and stamped with United States Army markings. A soldier climbing down with a clipboard and a flat Iowa drawl. "John Carson?" the soldier asked. "That's me," John replied cautiously. "You're on the list. We're requisitioning honey for the 8th Army. Says here you've got 350 hives. Is that right?" John paused. "That's right." The soldier didn't smile. "Sir, we need everything, especially what keeps." As the truck pulled up to the barn, John felt pride tangled with a helplessness he couldn't name. He wasn't sending rifles or shells, only jars of honey. He mumbled under his breath, "Ain't nobody ever won a war with bees' spit?" He was wrong. In 72 hours, one of his foolish ideas involving that very honey would help rescue a convoy of American trucks moving through occupied France. People called him a fool, a nobody, just a farmer, until his honey trick altered the course of a convoy, his farm, and perhaps more. John Carson wasn't a hero by the usual measures. He was a farmer and beekeeper like many in rural America who had never left their home county. Born in 1908, he inherited 160 acres from his father, along with an old barn, a handful of tractors needing attention, and a few hives tucked beneath an apple tree. By 1935, he had expanded that modest start into a full beekeeping business, overseeing more than 200 colonies, roughly 12 million bees. He produced up to 3,000 pounds of honey each season, making him one of southwestern Iowa's most productive apiarists. Everything changed in 1941. After the December 7th attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States plunged into war and every person, tool, and resource was pulled into its orbit. John watched neighbors' sons and then his brother Mark answer the call. Some enlisted. Others were drafted. John, 33 at the time, had a damaged knee from a farm accident and was classified 4F, unfit for service. That single letter haunted him. He wanted to fight. Instead, he was ordered to grow, to produce, to harvest. While others bled on foreign shores, John was assigned to meet government quotas for sugar beets, corn, and soybeans. But it would be his bees, not his row crops, that ultimately made the difference. During the early war years, sugar became severely rationed. In 1942, the federal government cut consumer sugar allowances to just 26 pounds per person per year, down from about 100 before the war. Sugar was needed for everything from preserving food to making munitions. Civilians turned increasingly to honey, and so did the military. Honey kept well, packed a lot of energy into a small volume, resisted spoilage, and had natural antibacterial qualities. It needed no refrigeration and could be portioned into small containers for frontline troops. The Army began seeking suppliers who could meet rising demand. John's name appeared in a 1943 Department of Agriculture ledger as a registered producer with surplus capacity. He received a government offer: deliver 700 pounds of honey to a processing plant in Des Moines, Iowa. It was a modest contract: fill jars, sign the forms, and the honey would be canned, labeled as Army issue, and shipped wherever American soldiers were fighting. At first, John treated it as just another task. He loaded the jars, completed the paperwork, and returned to tending his hives. Unbeknownst to him, things were moving behind the scenes. The military wasn't using honey only as food. Engineers and medics were quietly testing it for other uses on a scale not tried before. They discovered honey could be used in wound dressings because of its antibacterial properties. It could help protect metal from rust. Mixed with beeswax, it made waterproof seals and could even quiet squeaking vehicle joints for stealth operations. On the farm, John remained oblivious. The war felt remote. Fewer letters from Mark, thinner ration books, aircraft filling the skies. And the bees carried on. By the end of 1943, John had grown his operation to 350 hives, more than 20 million bees, producing enough honey to fill a small freight car. Yet he still felt sidelined, unable to imagine how his quiet labor in the American heartland would soon intersect with one of WY2's boldest logistical gambits. All it would take was one instant, one notion, and a trick so ridiculous few believed it could work. By spring 1944, John Winslow Carson was producing nearly 4,000 pounds of honey, more than anyone else in his county. But the more honey he sent, the deeper his frustration grew. The government never said where the jars ended up. No acknowledgement, no thanks, no proof that his work was making a difference. He loaded barrels into the backs of army trucks driven by strangers whose faces he never saw. Only gloved hands, clipped signatures, and engines that droned away over the rise. "Feels like casting it into the sea," he told a friend. "No way to know if it ever reaches a soldier." Neighbors made it worse. "Still fussing with bee juice?" One sniped at church. "We're trying to win a war." Another muttered, "Heard the army's sending you a medal made of comb." John feigned a laugh, but the sting remained. He had already lost 2 close pals to the draft, and his brother's last letter was dated December. It was now April. Nights found him sitting quietly with his hand on his knee, rereading Mark's final lines. "We're cold, wet, sometimes hungry, but always moving. If you send anything, send warmth." Those words lodged in him. He began to see honey as more than food. Dense, slow-burning fuel. Waterproof, adhesive, and preservative. He recalled his grandfather shining boots with beeswax and oil, and a neighbor once using honey to plug a radiator leak in an old Model A. What else could it do? One evening, while tending a stubborn barn hinge, he wiped a rag soaked in a blend of old honey and linseed oil across the rusted joint. The screech stopped immediately. The next morning, a truck from the Des Moines depot rolled up. Same drab appearance, same clipboard. But the corporal looked beaten. "Last night we lost 6 trucks in Normandy," he said without meaning to name the place. "Lost?" John asked. Noise from engines. The smell of oil. Krauts could hear them coming for miles. "We can't sneak with trucks coughing diesel and groaning like coffins." Something snapped into place for John. He leaned forward. "I might have something," he said. The corporal stared blankly. "It's a compound I mixed. Quiets hinges, masks odor. Just honey, beeswax, and linseed oil." The corporal barked a laugh. "You want us to smear bee spit on army trucks?" John didn't flinch. "Might save 6 trucks next time." The corporal, surprised, then shrugged. "Fine, 1 crate. I'll take it to the boys at Fort Riley and see." John barely slept that night. Weeks went by with no word, and he returned to the hive yard watching bees weave tight dances above frames. Efficient, humble, purposive. He thought about propolis sealing hive cracks to muffle vibration and conceal the colony. "Those little bastards been doing stealth long before we figured it out," he muttered. Then on May 12th, a black military sedan pulled into his yard. 2 men stepped out. One wore a medic's armband, the other was from logistics. No uniforms, only brown coats and hard eyes. "Heard you're mixing things," the coat said. John nodded. We ran a field test, the other added. Coated axles, doors, and exhaust covers on 3 trucks with your stuff. John asked, barely breathing. And? They ran silent, smelled like a bakery, and got in behind the ridge before the Germans heard them, the man said. He handed John a paper. Effective immediately, you're cleared to produce 100 gallons of the compound per month. Code name, Sweet Silence. John blinked. Sweet Silence, the officer repeated. Welcome to the war, Mr. Carson. Outside, the buzzing changed. The bees sounded like a distant drumbeat. He had crossed an invisible threshold from farmer to wartime resource, and neither he nor anyone else yet knew how far that absurd idea would spread. By late May 1944, John Carson wasn't simply sending honey anymore. He was manufacturing a military compound barrel by barrel. His old shed for winter frames became a makeshift production room. Buckets of raw honey sat next to vats of melted beeswax and drums of linseed oil. The air was thick and cloying, and everything gleamed with tackiness. Flies hovered at the panes. He didn't care. He had orders to satisfy. Each week a military truck from Fort Riley collected containers now marked SSC-7 for Sweet Silence Compound Number 7, with no other labels. The Army said nothing about destinations or uses. In the second week of June, a clue arrived. A handwritten note from Sergeant Benjamin Gentry of the 59th Logistics Division in the European Theater. Your stuff works, it read. Coded 5 vehicles last week. Germans didn't hear us coming. Got the drop outside Koran. 2 enemy trucks destroyed. 0 American casualties. Smelled like Christmas. Keep it coming. John read the letter twice, folded it, and tucked it into a mason jar on his shelf, like a talisman. Still, doubts nagged. Him. Would it hold up, or was this just a lucky break? He began to tinker, changing formulas and proportions. One morning, while applying a heavier coat to an old flatbed axle, he noticed the paste not only killed squeaks, but insulated the wheel against vibration. It muffled detection as well as sound. In a war where columns could be located by airborne acoustic gear, dampening vibration mattered. He sent a note back. Compound now acts as a vibration dampener on metal surfaces. Try under hoods, doors, exhaust seams. Also repels water. A reply came a week later, typed, Tested modifications on 8 Jeeps near St. Lo. Dampening reduced acoustic detection by 25%. Bravo! Authorization increased to 200 gallons per month. Prepare shipments to Port of Liverpool for pre-invasion outfitting. The larger picture snapped into focus. The Allies were preparing to strike Fortress Europe, and his compound would be part of that mass effort. On June 3rd, a courier arrived with crates and curt instructions. Prepare 10 barrels for transatlantic shipment. Label Class A engineering materials. Destination confidential. No insignia, no rank, only urgency. As John sealed the last barrel that night, he paused and looked out over the dark fields. His bees were quiet inside their hives. No wind, no stars, only a distant heavy thunder rolling from the west, not a storm but a weight that settled into your bones. He didn't yet know that those barrels would reach Normandy inside 10 days, or that somewhere behind enemy lines, men would smear a farmer's ridiculous honey paste onto armored doors before driving into one of the war's deadliest stretches. What began as a barnyard tinkering had crossed the channel. Honey on the front lines. Normandy, June 12, 1944. 6 days after D-Day. In the muddled French countryside, columns of American trucks crept along cratered lanes under cover of night. Hedges formed thick walls. The enemy still lay in wait, and German ambushes struck without warning. But this time something different accompanied the convoy. Captain Lawrence Mendel of the 3rd Armored Division later reported that a group of modified trucks slipped silently through a zone scouts had flagged as a kill area near Smear Eagles. No metallic clanks, no doors squeaking, no telltale diesel reek. We were ghosts, Mendel would write. They expected engines and rattles. Instead, we gave them silence and molasses. That silence had a name. Sweet Silence, Compound Number 7. A sticky dark coating daubed on axles, hinges, and exhaust flanges. Mechanics called it bee grease. Infantrymen dubbed it ghost syrup. Whatever the nickname, it worked. Back in Iowa, John Carson kept producing, melting, stirring, and filling barrels, hands blistered from hot wax, arms sore from hauling drums. Yet he pressed on. On June 22nd, a courier brought something different. An unmarked manila envelope containing a black and white photograph, its edges ragged. The image showed an American convoy of 6 trucks parked behind hedgerows near Karan. One soldier crouched by a wheel, brush in hand, a tin beside him. On the photo's back, penciled in, a line, "Your stuff saved us." That picture struck John harder than any letter. It transformed his labor, his bees, barn, and sweat, into a tangible part of the liberation effort. By July, the Army's logistics command expanded Sweet Silence into a dozen engineering units, shipping more than 400 gallons weekly overseas. British and Canadian forces requested it for nocturnal raids, and still the program remained secret. The Germans noticed fewer mechanical signatures and blamed terrain or weather. They did not suspect a Midwestern beekeeper had invented a natural stealth aid. The first major trial came the night of July 29th, when Allied intelligence intercepted a German plan to shell a vital American supply route near St. Lo. Several divisions depended on those trucks. If the convoy were destroyed, frontline positions would be forced back. Command decided to send an entire coated convoy, 84 trucks, all treated with Sweet Silence. Mechanics had 6 hours to apply the paste, working with brushes, mops, and bare hands. The mixture clung to every seam and joint like sap on bark, thick and pungent. At 0200, the column rolled with no headlights, no revving, no squeals, just silent shadows through the mist. German scouts failed to hear them. German mortars did not open fire. By 0600, the entire supply run had completed with 0 losses. No trucks hit, no men wounded. The after-action note was terse. Silence preserved operational secrecy. Recommend continued use of SSC-7 in night convoys. For the first time in the European theater, a logistics miracle had happened without explanation. That same morning, John received another package, this one from his brother Mark. Inside lay a worn field jacket smelling of sweat and diesel, and a short note, "Your honey got here before I did." John folded the paper, pressed it to his chest, and sat on the barn step. Around him he could smell wax and oil, but beneath those odors the bees' scent lingered, like hope. A small trick in a vast battle. August 20th, 1944. The Falaise Gap, northern France. For weeks, Allied forces had shoved German units east across Normandy. What began as a breakout threatened to become decisive. Nearly 50,000 Wehrmacht soldiers were trapped between converging Allied pincers. Seal them in, and the German position in France would collapse. Let them escape, and the campaign could drag on for months. The Gap, a roughly 20-kilometer corridor of torn fields and sodden roads, became a desperate battleground. General Omar, Bradley needed supplies to move faster than the enemy. Fuel, ammo, rations, radios, everything. Enter Convoy Echo 9. 212 trucks, 38 jeeps, and 12 half-tracks, loaded to capacity and set to travel through farm tracks, narrow bridges, and wooded lanes that swallowed moonlight. At 1900, the motor pool commander made an order that in any other war would have sounded absurd. Apply the Carson compound over everything. 36 mechanics sprang into action, unrolling barrels marked SSC-7. The honey-based compound, thick, black gold and tacky, was painted onto door hinges, axle joints, hood seals, and tailgate locks. The air smelled of burnt sugar and linseed smoke. Inside one truck sat Sergeant Mark Carson of the 1st Armored Division, John's brother. unaware that the paste coating his engine came from the same hands that had dragged him out of Iowa mud as a boy. He only heard what the officer said. "These trucks don't squeak. They don't reek. You roll silent. You get there alive." By 22:30, the convoy was ready. Engines turned over with a soft purr. No revving, no clanking gear changes, just steady motion. The night was absolute. Moonless, clouded, and fog-thick. Headlights were banned. Radio silence was enforced. Only the faint stars, half hidden by the mist, could map their path. As the column rolled, it came within about 1,000 meters, just over half a mile, of a German mortar crew concealed in the hedgerow near Troon. Scouts later reported the enemy never reacted. No shells, no searchlights, no alarm. Silence was not immortality, though. 10 miles into the route, as the trucks crossed a makeshift wooden span over the Dives River, a German recon patrol spotted movement. A flare went up, white, then red, and gunfire followed. The convoy split. Some trucks pushed straight on while others dropped into the ravine below the ridge to try and outflank the attackers. In one of the lead vehicles, Sergeant Mark Carson manned a Browning, .30 caliber, and barked into the radio, "They've seen us. Move." The surprise they'd bought with those quiet miles mattered. The first 5 minutes of silence had carried them just far enough to avoid the worst of the German kill zone. Shells screamed overhead but struck only the rear of the formation. 3 trucks knocked out, 8 men wounded, none killed. The remainder, 198 vehicles, made it through, delivering over 100 tons of ammunition, 5,000 gallons of fuel, and 2 field hospitals crated and intact. They arrived in time to bolster the Canadian First Army, which sealed the Falaise Gap the next morning. That night, drained soldiers raised triage tents and reloaded guns in near silence. Someone lit a cigarette and the medic warned, "Careful, this is a sugar field. You might catch fire." They laughed. It was the first genuine laughter in days. The Carson compound began to appear in official notes. Even General George S. Patton mentioned it offhand during a debrief. Whatever voodoo they put on those trucks, keep doing it. But the real proof arrived in a letter. A week later, John Carson, in Iowa, opened a battered envelope with foreign stamps and found a scrap of tent canvas and a hastily scribbled note. "They used your stuff on our truck. We rolled quiet even under fire. I shot back and lived. Some didn't, but most of us made it. Mark." John stood at his kitchen table for nearly an hour staring at the words. He didn't cry or shout. He simply nodded, went out to the hives, opened one gently and whispered, "You did good, girls." That was all he could manage. The bees went on with their work, oblivious, sealing, protecting, building, just as John's compound had done. A sweet, sticky silence that carried men through danger into another dawn. The war did not end in Normandy. It thundered east through France into Belgium, across the frozen Ardennes, and finally into Berlin's ruined streets. For John Winslow Carson, his contribution ended on a quiet morning in September 1944 when the trucks stopped coming. No notice, no explanation, just absence. The barrels sat stacked and the compound stood ready, but the army never returned. John did not ask questions. He knew what it meant. His task was finished. By winter 1944, Allied forces had shattered the German lines and logistics shifted. New materials and technologies developed in well-funded labs replaced improvised solutions. A beekeeper's trick was no longer needed. That did not erase its value. A post-war quartermaster report tersely noted. Temporary vehicle coating designated SSC-7 demonstrated minor but measurable improvement in stealth movement under limited field conditions. Source: Civilian Supplier, Iowa. No medals, no citations, just a single line buried in bureaucratic paperwork. It suited John fine. He had never sought glory. In spring 1945, while cities celebrated with ticker tape and bands, he returned to routine, repairing tractors, repainting the barn, splitting hives ahead of the clover bloom. When Mark finally came home thinner and quieter, They spoke little of combat, instead sitting on the porch with coffee watching the bees. After a long silence, Mark remarked, "I heard they tested your stuff on the Navy, too." John grinned. "Well, hell, maybe I sank a sub," he said, and they laughed properly for the first time in years. Years passed, and the compound faded. The formula lived only in John's memory, an instinctive recipe born of trial, error, and long Iowa summers. By 1953, a government inspector visited during an agricultural survey and asked if John's operation had supported the war effort. "In a way," John answered. "I kept some folks alive." The inspector, puzzled, wrote only what he found in the form. By the 1960s, the barn sagged, the empty barrels rusted, but the bees persisted, their work unchanged and precise. They asked for no thanks, and neither did John. He died in 1971 at 63. His obituary ran 4 lines in the Harlan County Register. John W. Carson, lifelong farmer and beekeeper, died Sunday at home, survived by his brother Mark. No mention of Normandy. No mention of hushed convoys. Years later, a child digging near a rusted gate found a small metal box with a cracked jar inside. Within the jar was a brittle folded note. "Sweet silence. Remember us." Maybe that was enough. Sometimes the smallest act in the largest war is preserved not by history, but by those who lived because of it. It is easy to assume history is shaped only by generals and tanks, by sweeping strategies and famous speeches. But sometimes it is fashioned by quieter things. A man in a barn, a swarm of bees, a sticky golden substance never intended for combat. John Carson never stormed a beach or fired a shot, yet his honey, what some called a foolish trick, rode through Normandy, crossed bridges under fire, and clung to axles hauling wounded boys home. It did something rare in war. It saved lives without taking any. There's something rawly human and American in that fact, that in the midst of the deadliest conflict the world had seen, one person using the most ancient resource could tip the balance not with violence, but with invention. A jar of honey became a weapon of silence, and for a moment silence was victory. How many other small acts have been overlooked? How many conflicts have been nudged by ideas rather than bullets? What's the most unexpected way you've seen someone make a difference? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. If this story surprised you or changed how you think about service and war, share it.